So I don't know if you remember last January when Senator Karen Fraser was here giving a talk on integrity in government. She said to us if we wanted to change the laws, change the government, if we wanted to see change, it was the culture that we had to change. And that seems like such a formidable task. And yet, I think that this week, all of the events of this week are pushing us and calling on us to contend with the culture that we have created and to find ways to actually change. So I have a little story from Dogen Zenji that I think speaks a little bit to some of the things that have happened this week. So there was a teacher named Kyogan who had a student, a woman named Myoshin. And they lived at this very wonderful temple up in the mountains. And there were 17 monks who were out going around trying to receive teachings from various teachers. This Kyogan was a great teacher. And so they went to his temple to receive the teachings. And so they arrived at the temple, and typically you enter, you've been on the road, so you wash your feet and you are shown into a room, and you're given tea and maybe some soup and something. And so the monks did that, and they had a little something to eat, and then they were sitting around talking, and Myoshin, the woman, heard them talking about the Dharma. And she went in and said, excuse me, I heard what you've been saying, the things that you are saying about the Dharma, but I'd like to point out that your understanding is not correct. And so she took some time to correct their understanding in the Dharma. 17 men. And then she left the room. And the monks sort of looked at one another and they talked briefly together. And they changed out of their dirty traveling clothes into their robes. And they went into the Dharma hall and they asked Myoshin to come in, at which point they formally bowed to her. And after they did that, they went back to their room, changed back into their traveling clothes, and left. They didn't think that, we have to wait to hear the man's view. They just left. They had received the teaching, a deep teaching, profound teaching. And this is, in the particular translation that I'm reading, this is the only time that Dogen uses the word courage. In 1,200 pages, he doesn't talk about courage, except this time, where he spoke about Myoshin's courage to address the 17 monks and then go back into her room. But what is so beautiful about this story is that these traveling monks receive the teaching and they stand in the dignity of the Dharma without resort to any gender assignment of any kind. There is no gender repercussions at all. They receive the Dharma, they receive the teaching, and they go on their way. And this is such a beautiful teaching of the need for all of us to listen to the teaching and not resort to gender assignments or to take the authority of men as a necessary thing, which we are very used to, having to have the authority of men. Women teachers have needed the authority of men in all religions. They have not been able to speak at times until they had the authority of a man teacher to be able to speak. But that doesn't happen in this Shobogenzo. And this is Dogen Zenji writing in about the year 1250. So this is an absolutely beautiful teaching to me. I find it the dignity of the men to receive and bow and go forward. And that, the dignity in the Dharma and the recognition of the teaching. No gender assignments. So we're in the throes of this right now, and so we've got just a very difficult time that we are in, and I think it's difficult for men and for women to try to come to terms with this question of gender and privilege, and for all of us to maybe lay down our swords and figure out how we can shift our culture so that we have less rancor in it and a deeper equality. Understanding that Dharma. And that Dogen is very clear about there is no gender in the Dharma. But this word courage also is an important word right now. The courage of women coming forward to speak about their experiences, and the courage of men to say, yes, I did that, and to apologize for it. So we have great calling on courage right now. And of course we know that courage has the underpinnings of fear. Of course we know that. Fear for rebuke, fear that you will be misunderstood, you won't be believed, fear that for a man to say, yes, I did that, to be, perhaps scoffed at by other men. It's very difficult, very difficult. But courage is a big word and an important practice. Because the element of courage says that there is something bigger than fear that must be addressed. Something more important than fear. Going beyond our own fears around something. Standing in the heart of integrity. And going forward. So, at the same time that it's very difficult, it's also a very rich time because of the potential for us to meet in a place of compassion for how we have attended to our culture, for how we have brought ourselves to create this mixed up culture. So the potential is great for that. So I hoped that we would have a conversation about this. It's so difficult, and it's such a difficult week in so many ways. And heartening. Certainly more heartening for women right now, I should say, than perhaps for men. But I don't think that's true. I think that there are many men coming forward to saying, yes, we can't do this anymore. We can't ignore the problem. All taking courage to speak. So maybe you have some thoughts on this. It's also a very sad time. It's so everything. It's all everything at once. But I just felt our need to bring it out, to speak about it, and to hold Dogen Zenji's story, to hold that moment of Myoshin standing before those 17 monks without the sense of gender, and everybody receiving the Dharma, standing in the Dharma. So maybe you have some thoughts. Yeah, Steve.
So, it was interesting. I don't know if you guys read Louis C.K.'s confession.
Yeah.
And immediately I thought, that's the right thing to do. Absolutely the right thing to do. And I'm sure that in doing it, he probably felt a sense of relief and freedom.
Yeah.
But then there was something that was going around on the internet about, I don't know who it was, but they took his confession and they edited it. And basically they took issue with it because they felt that he was still not fully...
Contrite.
Yeah, he wasn't...
He didn't say, I'm sorry.
Well, he said he was sorry.
He did. I thought he did. I felt he said it.
But he still was sort of holding back, so to speak. And I thought, that's interesting because, out of all these men who we've discovered have done these horrible things, here's a guy who is stepping out and trying to, say, hey, okay, I did this. And then the other side as well, but you weren't contrite enough. You weren't sorry enough.
Him for So this is the problem, that you can't do anything today in our culture. You're going to be criticized no matter what you do. But I love Louis C.K. And I thought that he's a brilliant comic. And I thought that what he said was great. I thought it was good. And I thought he was contrite. I thought he said, I am sorry for all the people, for the women I've hurt.
Yeah, that's
for the pain that I've caused. He said that straight out.
Yeah.
But you can't win today, I think. So, yeah.
I think as far as courage goes, courage to speak out, the courage to apologize, I think, is a lesser, because I kind of feel like I don't want you to be mad at me, so I'm going to say this, so I'm not.
Sure,
I think that the courage that should be happening more often is speaking out, calling people on that kind of activity, whether it's physical or verbal, when you're among a group of people where that kind of thing is accepted, and being the one that stands up and says,
that's not funny.
That's not cool, or it's not funny, or how would you like it if someone said that about your mom or your sister?
Right. Yeah.
Having been in that situation and having seen plenty of people in that situation and other people, that's what heartens me, is when people more and more are coming out and saying, no, that's not.
Yeah, I agree. Because that, you're on a kind of a small scale there, but you're around friends or co-workers or something like that, and you know that you're going to be thought of in a particular way for having stood on those grounds. And sometimes, you dampen the joke that was just told at the cost of another gender. And so you're kind of a killjoy for doing it. So that, you're quite right. But it's doing that again and again and again in those situations that makes change, because our culture is where we are, the group we live with, and the people we work with, etc. So yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. And there's hardly a woman I know who hasn't had an experience of a difficult experience. So you were going to say something else.
Well, I'm basically the same what you just said, and I think if we're all honest, no matter what gender we are, we all know this has been it was taken for granted. I mean, this is just the way of the genders behaved, and it was not spoken about. Just not spoken about for so long. Yeah. And it was allowed to go on. And so here we are. But I mean, I think if all of us looked at all the situations we've been in throughout life since our childhood, we can see it everywhere. Yeah. And it's just not talked about. Yeah. It's just... Right. But we know. Yeah. We know.
to keep equal here, there were men who came forward too who were sexually abused. I mean, men also, and even in domestic violence, there are men who get beat up by their wives too. So we're kind of on equal ground, in this situation, and so the prevalence is more for women, of course, but there are plenty, men also get sexually abused. So,
I think another thing would be disbanding the cult of celebrity, where we put these people on pedestals and allow them to, whether they're athletes or actors or musicians or whatever, that really allows that behavior to happen more readily than maybe if it was just, a librarian or a waiter or whoever, instead of, an athlete or a comedian or an actor.
Well, in my case, it was just somebody I worked with. No fame, so I was not raped. I just want to make that clear. But I certainly, came close. So, and this is often the case. It's usually for women, it's somebody they know. More often, women are raped by somebody they know, where there's not an issue of celebrity at all. Yeah, Steve.
So how do you, I have a really hard time reconciling. I mean, what happens in the United States is bad enough, but then you go to places like India or Saudi Arabia where it's even more ingrained, and it's like, to me, it's how can they not see how awful it is of the way they're treating another human being?
Right.
And I don't even know if it's accurate to say that, well, what happens here is just sort of on a lesser scale.
Yeah.
I mean, over there, it's so deeply embedded in their culture.
Yeah. It is. I mean, the issues for women globally are horrific. Horrific. Because the worst, any man, no matter what level he is at, any job or whatever it is, still trumps a woman. Color, shape, size, job, whatever, still trumps a woman. So it's horrific in many cultures around the world, really. So our issue, as always, when we think about these subjects, is to return to the Dharma for balance. To always return to the Dharma for balance. So, even call on Dogen Zenji's story, to be able to hold the dignity of men, which is very difficult today. To remember that men have dignity, and there is no need to resort to any kind of behavior that would diminish that dignity, and for women to demand their dignity also, and not give in to protecting men either, by right of women wanting privilege that men bestow upon them, because men have privilege. The more privilege a man has, the more he is able to give woman privilege. So women, often go around men who have a great deal of privilege so that they can have privilege. I mean, that's how the system works. So to understand that kind of privilege is empty. It has no true value in in one's own integrity. To really hold one's integrity is a practice. So when we read the paper and we hear the news, we must hold it within the realm of Dharma for the sake of changing the culture. We can't just condemn people. The culture has made it possible for people to behave this way. And our silence has allowed it also, as Allison pointed out. So to not condemn, but to understand that collectively we made this system, and it's a system change that we need. And that system gets changed one by one by one by one, as you point out. Every time you stand up and you say, no, that's not correct. And we do it with some kind of grace and not condemnation in a form of teaching, so that people are not embarrassed by it, but they understand and they say, okay, I don't want to do that again. So it's the system where we make change that is very difficult and long, and it's not all going to go away in my time, and it's not ever going to go away, actually. It's just that we challenge inequality in every generation. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. reminds us of that. He was such a firm teacher in reminding, it's not just once, friends. You're going to fight this every single generation. But we have to at least get to a point where we see it, So, as we hoped that we would see with the Civil Rights Amendment, right? Mm-hmm. We hoped that we would see greater racial equality with that. And here we are in this battle again. I mean, it seemed, although from the standpoint of those who, for people of color, well, we marginally made it. We got there a little bit, but the question is then, we must challenge it again, because it just seeps into the culture again and again. So here we are in this question now, it seems to me, trying to address this question. And once again, we stand in the Dharma when we make the challenge. And that's where we find our balance in the Dharma. So. Any other thoughts? Anyone? Yeah, Bob.
It seems to me that at the heart of this, and even listening to some of the accounts of abuse on the radio, at the heart of it is power.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like we kind of dance around that, but we don't examine power. We don't examine the nature of power and how we exercise it and how it manifests. And I mean, I don't have any answers. It just seems that at the core, perhaps at the core of our culture, is a selection for power. Mm-hmm. Whether it's political or economic or celebrity or cult influence. I start to peel away things, and there it is. And I don't know where it comes from. Where did it come from? Is it part of an evolutionary process that all of a sudden, poof? I don't know. But it seems to me that recognizing its presence and how we're using it, I think, is important. Yeah. So.
Well, I was just, when you look at a guy like Harvey Weinstein, I mean, nobody questioned that man's power in Hollywood. He had the power. He didn't necessarily have to exert it. Everybody who, knew who he was and knew he had the power. With that guy, it seems like he didn't adapt. Something way back when he missed the boat on, and sexually speaking, he just was not adapted to his sexuality, because the stuff that he did was just, to me it's worse than someone trying to exert power over another person. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's that element, but it seems like it's something more primordial with him. I don't know.
From a nihilistic perspective, he was being free. He was doing what he wanted when he wanted to do it.
Yeah, I can see that. But
Now, whether
That's
it's
what our
right,
president- yeah, our
whether it's
president said
right
that.
or
You can
not
do
is
what you want.
another
Yeah.
question. But
Yeah.
and he had the power and money to hire people to cover him
Yeah. Right.
or discourage anyone from pursuing him in court.
Yes.
It-
Well, in our Congress, we together have spent $21 million on cases in Congress. Or maybe you didn't know all of
no,
that.
I didn't.
$21 million have been used by the American public to settle cases of sexual abuse by our Congress people.
How do you differentiate power from privilege?
Well, I think that maybe we'll have some people who can contribute to this, but they're very, very close. I mean, if you have privilege, you are in a position of power because you simply can call the shots. You simply can, say whatever you want to say in that situation. So it is essentially holding power. And the question is how you use it. You may, we all have privilege. Every single person in this room has white privilege or male privilege or some kind of privilege. But we might not necessarily exercise it with power, except that we enjoy it quietly. The white people can go into the store shopping and they're not going to have somebody following them around assuming that they're stealing. So we have that kind of privilege, for instance. Men have privilege to be able to go out hiking by themselves. And that's a use of privilege in a situation without having to think about anything, whereas women can't go out hiking alone because it's just plain unsafe. So we have privilege, but when we exercise it, then we are using the power. And at the same time, we have a power structure that allows privilege to be. But I don't go around thinking, oh, I have power because I'm a white woman. I just don't, we don't think like that. But we don't have to. And privilege means not having to think about something. I don't have to think about being a black woman and what that means every time I step out on the street. I don't have to think about it. And yet, for people of color have to think about that all the time. So privilege means not having to think about something, not having to worry about something. And that's very hard to educate and get across because you don't have to think about it. And the worst thing is that nobody who has privilege ever wants to give it up. So we have the problem in racial and gender and age. Young people don't want to give up worrying about the elderly. Age is another, loss of privilege group, and we know all these groups that have lack of privilege. So it's when it is knowingly exercised that it turns into a greater power, let's say. By itself, of course, the system holds a power. White people hold a power just by being white. But we don't think about it. Yes.
Karen was telling me a story that one of her insureds was relating to her, and he was a black gentleman. He was having a conversation with a white gentleman, and he had moved to the Northwest, but he was from Mississippi. And I'm not sure exactly how the conversation went, but this man grew up in Mississippi, and he witnessed lynchings on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. And at one point in their conversation, the white gentleman asked this black gentleman, when are you people going to get over this? Slavery was, 160 years ago. It's time to move on. And of course, it's an idiotic statement, but I couldn't help thinking that, well, they'll get over it once we stop doing horrific things.
Sure. Right. Yeah.
It still continues today, but just sort of on a different.
There's a fireman, I forget where it happened, just a couple of weeks ago, who found a noose wrapped around his locker or something like that.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah.
Is that local?
I don't think, no, it was not the state of Washington, but it was in America, let's say that.
Yeah.
Well, and it's as though it's on the rise.
Yes, yeah. Well, we've sort of released, we've opened Pandora's box, and we've allowed this expression to take place because our leaders have made it okay to make racial statements.
Yeah.
So,
but don't you think, if the good that's going to come out of this is that it's coming out in the open, so we can deal with it?
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. And we can't regulate morality or ethics. You can't regulate that, but you can regulate behavior. You absolutely can. I mean, that's what our laws are about. So we can do that, and we hope we do. Certainly, I think all those firemen got fired.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
I'm not sure what happened. Something, but in any event, that's what we have to hold to: the regulation of our behaviors that are harmful to our society, and. We create the culture then, or we change our culture by refining our behaviors together. No?
I mean, it seems to me... Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, yeah.
It seems to me that one of the functions of culture is to communicate from generation to generation some core values that allow for the culture to remain coherent and integrated, and that's failing.
Yeah, right, yeah.
I mean, things like honesty.
Yeah,
I mean,
for instance, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's dysfunction at that level, and at the same time, we're emphasizing broad notions of free speech, which allow for anyone to say whatever they want, regardless of how harmful or abusive it is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm agreeing with you. There needs to be some speech as a behavior, and there are some things that should be called out.
Right. Yeah.
And anyway.
Well, we started off the discussion with the question of changing the culture, with Karen Fraser saying we want to change our culture. And so, once again, to bring it back to Dharma, one of the, I think, important things that we have in terms of our practice is that we live a particular culture in our Zen practice, and that we learn that culture together, and we respect the culture that we create together. We call it tradition in Zen practice, but it is a culture. And so we learn this and we carry it forward, and we do the best we can. So remember Dogen Zenji's, remember that's to please men. You didn't hear that story, Will, but it's Dogen Zenji's story of, the very fine conduct of men in relationship to Myoshin, a woman monk, and, hold on to that integrity and that dignity of men in relationship, of bypassing the need to resort to gender as one's, recognition in the Dharma. So... and it goes both ways. Yeah, so let's do our best out there, folks. Big world. Whoa. never know what's coming up. Man, do we have interesting times, don't we?